I don't even know if there's a unique sort of philosophical elements there. Anyway, can you maybe from those or something else speak to different unique elements that are interesting to think about implementation of Marxism in the real world?
Probably the best way to get into this is to describe something that happened in Marxism that then shapes the answer to your question. In the early days of Marx's writings, and his life spans the 19th century. Born in 1818, dies in 1883. So literally, he lives the 19th century. And you might, to make things simple, you might look at the first half, first two-thirds of his life as overwhelmingly gathering together the precursors to his own work. Marx was unusually scholarly in the sense that partly because he worked a regular job, and partly because he was an exile in London his adult life. He worked in the library. He had a lot of time. He got subsidized a little bit by Engels' family manufacturers. And you might say the first half to two-thirds of his life are about the critique of capitalism. And that was what, in a broad sense, the audience for his work, Western Europe more or less, was interested in. That's what they wanted. And he gave that to him. He wasn't the only one, but he was very, very effective at it. By the last third of his life, he and the other producers of an anti-capitalist movement, people like the Chartists in England, another movement, the anarchists of various kinds, like Proudhon in France, or Kropotkin, or Bakunin in Russia, and so on. You put all these together, and there was a shift in what the audience, let's call it a mixture of militant working class people on the one hand, and critical or radical intelligentsia on the other. They now wanted a different question. They were persuaded by the analysis. They were agreeable that capitalism was a phase they would like to do better than. And the question became, how do we do this? Not anymore, should we, why should we, could we maybe fix capitalism? No, they had gotten to the point the system has to be fundamentally changed. But they didn't go, you might imagine, they didn't go and say, well, what will that new system look like? They didn't go that way. What they did was ask the question, how could we get beyond capitalism? It seems so powerful. It seems to have captured people's minds, people's daily lives, and so on. And the focus of the conversation became, this was already by the last third of the 19th century, the question of the agency, the mechanism whereby we can get beyond. And again, make a long story short, the conversation focused on seizing the government. See, before that, it wasn't that the government was not a major interest. If you read Marx's Capital, the great work of his maturity, 3 volumes, there's almost nothing in the state. He mentions it. He's interested in the details of how capitalism works. Factory by factory, store by store, office. What's the structure? The government's secondary for it.
But there's also humans within that capitalist system. There's the working class.
Right. That's what he's interested in. Think of it almost mechanically like the workplace. In the workplace, there are some people who do this and other people who do that, and they accept this division of authority, and they accept this division of what's going on here, particularly because he believed that the core economic objective of capitalism was to maximize something called profit, which his analysis located right there in the workings of the enterprise. The government was not the key factor.
And he was looking at ideas of value.
Yes.
How much value does the labor of the individual workers provide, and that means how do we reward the workers in an ethical way? So those are the questions of. Okay, but the government
is
was not part of that picture.
So it's very significant towards the end of the 19th century. Marx is still alive when this begins, but it really gets going after he dies. Is this debate among Marxists about the role of the state? They all agree, nearly all of them agree, that you have to get the state. The working class has to get the state because they see the state as the ultimate guarantor of capitalism. When things get really out of hand, the capitalist calls the police, or he calls the army, or both of them. And so the government is, in a sense, this key institution captured in Marxist language by the bourgeoisie, by the other side, the capitalists, and yet vulnerable because of suffrage. If suffrage is universal or nearly so, if everybody gets a vote, which in a way capitalism brings to bear, part of its rejection of feudalism, French America created a place where elected representatives, so the government being subject to suffrage creates the notion, here's how we're going to do it. You have to seize the state. And then that gets agreed upon, but there's a big split as to how to do it. One side says you go with the election. You mobilize the voter. That gets to be called reformism. And the other side is revolution. Don't do that. This system, if I may call it Bernie again, is rigged. You can't get there. They've long ago learned parliaments. They buy the politicians and all that. And therefore, revolution is going to be the way to do it. Revolution gets a very big boost because the Russians, they did it that way. They didn't do it. I mean, they fought to do in the parliament, but they didn't. And that this focus on the state goes way beyond what the leaders at the time. And if you're interested in names, there was a great theorist of the role of the state in a reformist strategy to get power in Germany, Edward Bernstein. Very good. His opponents in Germany were Karl Kautsky and Rosa Luxemburg, two other huge figures in Marxism. They wrote the articles that everybody reads, but it was a much broader debate. And by the way, that debate still goes on.
Reformism versus revolution.
And in terms not all that different. I mean, it's adjusted to history, but in terms different.
Can you comment on where you lean in terms of the mechanism of progress, reformation versus
I'd rather tell you
revolution?
the historical.
Sure.
Over and over again, in most cases, the reformists have always won. Because revolution is frightening, is scary, is dangerous. And so most of the time, when you get to the whole discussion, not an abstract thing for conferences, but a real strategic issue, the reformists have won. I'll give you an example from the United States. In the Great Depression of the 1930s, you had an extraordinary shift to the left in the United States. The greatest shift to the left in the country's history, before or since. Nothing like it. Suddenly, you created a vast left wing composed of the labor movement, which went crazy in the 1930s. We organized people into unions in the 1930s than at any time before or any time since. It is the explosion. And at the same time, the explosion of two socialist parties and the Communist Party that became very powerful. They all together created a very powerful leftist presence in this country. They debated in a strategically real way, reform or revolution. reformers were the union people, by and large, and the communists were the revolutionaries, by and large. They were affiliated with the Communist International, with Russia, and all of that. And in between, you might say the two socialists. One that was Trotskyist inspiration, and the other one more moderate Western European. And they had this intense debate. And they ended up, the reformers won that debate. There was no revolution in the 1930s here. But there was a reform that achieved unspeakably great successes, which is why it was as strong and remains as strong because it achieved in a few years, 1930s, around 1933, Social Security, the country never had before. It's the same one we have now. Unemployment insurance never existed before, that you have today. Minimum wage for the first time, you still have that today. And a federal program of employment that hired 15 million people. I mean, these were unspeakable gifts, if you like, to the working class.
So that's the 30s and 40s.
30s, not much in the 40s, but in the 30s. And here's the best part. It was paid for by taxes and corporations. When people today say, the joke is I have to teach American history to Americans because it has been erased from consciousness.
We'll return to that, but first, let's take a stroll back to the beginning of the 20th century with the Russians.
So their interpretation goes like this. Everybody was right. The state is crucial. We were right. We were the revolutionaries. We seized the state here in Russia. Now we have the state, and socialism is when the working class captures the state, either by reform or revolution, and then uses its power over the state to make the transition from capitalism to the better thing we're going toward. And again, make a long story short, interest of time. What happens, which is not unusual in history, is that the means becomes the end. In other words, Lenin was crystal clear before he doesn't live very long. He dies at 23. So he's only in power from 17 to 22. By that time, he has his brain trouble.
Not 1923, by the way, not at age 23.
Yeah. 1923. Yeah, he's only there for 5 years. He's very clear. He even says, I've done work on that, published, so I know this. He says in a famous speech, let's not fool ourselves. We have captured the state, but we don't have socialism. We have to create that. We have to move towards that. With Stalin, Lenin dies, and there's a fight between Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky loses the fight, he's exiled, goes to Mexico. Stalin is now alone in power, does all the things he's famous or infamous for. And by the end of the 20s, Stalin makes a decision. Not that he makes it alone. Things have evolved in Russia so that they do the following. They declare that they are socialism. In other words, socialism becomes when you capture the state. Not when the state capture has enabled you to do X, Y, Z other thing. No. The state itself, once you have it, is socialism.
So when a socialist captures the state, that's socialism.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. And
I feel like that's definitionally confusing.
If you go to many parts of the United States today, and you ask people, what's socialism? They'll tell you, they'll look at you, they'll say, when I first heard this, what? Post office. Wild business. The post office, Amtrak, the United States, where the government runs something. This is socialism. See, capitalism is if the government doesn't run it. Individual, not a government official, runs it, well then it's capitalism. If the government takes it, then it's socialism.
So what is wrong with that reasoning? So the idea, I think,
Well,
actually,
there's nothing wrong with it. It's a way of looking at the world. It's just got nothing to do with Marx.
well, there's Marx, there's Marxism.
Right.
Let's try to pull this apart. So, what role does central planning have in Marxism? So, Marxism is concerned with this class struggle, with respecting the working class. What is the connection between that struggle and central planning? Central planning is often associated with Marxism.
Right.
So a centralized power is doing.
Russia did that.
Okay. That has to do with a very specific set of implementations initiated by the Soviet Union.
Has nothing to do with it.
How else can you do?
I don't think you can find
Yes.
anywhere in Marx's writing anything about central planning or any other kind of planning.
Again, fundamentally, then Marx's work, it has to do with factories, with workers, with the bourgeoisie, and the exploitation of the working class. What is beyond capitalism?
Right. So maybe we should turn to that and explain.
Yes. Okay. Yes. What? Okay. We've already looked historically at several attempts to go beyond capitalism. How else can we go beyond capitalism?
Right. Let me push you a little further. They didn't succeed, in my judgment, as a Marxist. And I'm now going to tell you why they didn't succeed. Because they didn't understand as well as they could have or should have what Marxism was trying to do. I think I would have liked them if I had lived at their time under their circumstances. It's not a critique of them, but it's a different way of understanding what's going on. All right. So, to give you an example. Most of my adult life, I have taught Marxian economics. I'm a professor of economics. I'm a graduate of American universities. As it happens, I'm a graduate of what in this country passes for its best universities. It's another conversation you and I can have. So I went to Harvard, then I went to Stanford, and I finished at Yale. I'm like a poster boy for elite education. They tried very hard. By the way, I spent 10 years, 20 semesters, one after the other, no break. In those 20 semesters, many of them never mentioned a word about Marxism. That is, no critique of capitalism was offered ever, with one professor in Stanford in the one semester. He gave me plenty to read, but nobody else.
So that's really interesting. You mentioned that in the past, and that's very true, which makes you a very interesting figure to hold your ground intellectually through this idea space, which people don't even talk about it. Perhaps we can discuss historically why that is, but nevertheless, in this case, Marxian economics, did Karl Marx come up in conversation as a kind of...
The best example came up only as an object of dismissal. So give you an example. The major textbook in economics that I was taught with, and that was for many years, economics, but it isn't quite anymore, was a book authored by a professor of economics at MIT named Paul Samuelson. And people, a whole generation or two were trained on his textbook. If you open the cover of his textbook, he has a tree. And and the tree is Adam Smith and David Ricardo at the root, and then the different branches of it. He's trying to give you an idea as a student of how the thing developed. And it's a tree, and everybody on it is bush. And then there's this one little branch that goes off like this, and so it starts in other words, we have to have it complete. It's not a complete figure. But beyond that, no. Nothing in the book gives you two paragraphs of an approach. But that's Cold War. I mean, that's really neither here nor there. That's the craziness. Yeah, that's the Cold War in this country. My professors were anyway. Let me get to the core of it. What I think will help. Marx was interested in the relationship of people in the process of production. That he's interested in the factory, the office, the store. What goes on, and by that he means what are the relationships among the people that come together in a workplace. And what he analyzes is that there is something going on there that has not been adequately understood and that has not been adequately addressed as an object needing transformation. Now, what does he mean? The answer is exploitation, which he defines mathematically in the following way. Whenever in a society, any society, you organize people, adults, not the children, not the sick, but healthy adults, in the following way. A big block of them, a clear majority, work. That is, they use their brains and their muscles to transform nature. A tree into a chair, a sheep into a woolen sweater, whatever. In every human community, Marx argues, there are the people who do that work, but they always produce more chairs, more sweaters, more hamburgers than they themselves consume. Whatever their standard of living. Doesn't matter. Low, medium, high. But they always produce more than they themselves consume. That more, by the way, Marx, when he writes this, uses the German word mehr, M-E-H-R, which is the English equivalent of more. It's the more. That more got badly translated into the word surplus. Shouldn't have been, but it was. By the way, by German and English people doing the translation.
What's the difference between more and surplus? Is there a nuance?
Yeah, because surplus has a notion of discretionary, sort of extra. He's not making a judgment that it's
It's a simple math equation.
Yes.
One minus the other.
Yes. X minus Y. X is the total output. Y is the consumption by the producer. Therefore, X minus Y equals S the surplus. Exactly. Now, Marx argues. The minute you understand this, you will ask the following question. Who gets the surplus? Who gets this extra stuff that is made but not consumed by those who made it? And Marx's answer is, therein lies one of the great shapers of any society. How is that organized? For example, who gets it? What are they asked, if anything, to do with it in exchange for getting it? What's their social role? For example, here we go now. To get this and get the core of it. And I don't charge. The workers themselves could get it. Right, that's right. The workers themselves could get it. That's the closest Marx comes to a definition of communism. Communism would be if the workers who produce the surplus together decide what to do with it.
So this has to do not just with who gets it, but more importantly, who gets to decide who gets it.
Well, who gets it and who gets to decide what to do with it. Right. Because you can't decide if you don't have disposition over it. So, this is the logic of the word sequence. It's produced. Marx uses the word appropriated, whose property, who gets to decide, if you like, what happens. All that property ever meant is who gets to decide and who's excluded.
That's a clean definition of communism.
Right. That's by the way, it's not just clean. It's the only one.
So can we just linger on the definition of exploitation?
Yes. Easy. Becomes very easy. Exploitation exists if and when the surplus that's produced is taken and distributed by people other than those who produce. Slaves produce a surplus which the master gets. Serfs produce a surplus which the lord gets. Employees produce a surplus which the employer gets. It's very simple. These are exploitative class structures because one class produces a surplus appropriated, distributed by another group of people, not the ones who produced it, which creates hostility, enmity, envy, anger, resentment, and all of the problems you can lump under the heading class struggle. I use a metaphor, simple metaphorical story. You have two children, let's assume, and you take them to Central Park, a few blocks from here. It's a nice day, and the children are playing, and in comes one of those men with an ice cream truck comes by. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, your children see the ice cream. Daddy, get me an ice cream. So you walk over, you pay some money, and you get two ice cream cones, and you give them to one of the children. The other one begins to scream and yell, how? Obvious. What's the issue? And you realize you just made a terrible mistake. So you order the one you gave the two ice cream cones to, give one of those to your sister or your brother or whatever it is. And that's how you solve the problem. Until a psychologist comes along and says, you didn't fix it by what you just did. You should never have done that in the first place. My response, so you understand, all of the efforts to deal with inequality, economic, political, culture, these are all giving the ice cream cone back to the kid. You should never do this in the first place.
The reallocation of resources creates bitterness.
Look at all. This country is tearing itself apart now in a way that I have never seen in my life, and I've lived here all my life, and I've worked here all my life. It's tearing itself apart, and it's tearing itself apart basically over the redistribution of wealth, having badly distributed, but that's all in Marx. And notice as I explain to you what is going on in this tension-filled production scene in the office of factory, I don't have to say a word about the government. I'm not interested in the government. The government's really a very secondary matter to this core question. And here comes the big point. If you make a revolution, and all you do is remove the private exploiter and substitute a government official without changing the relationship, you could call yourself a Marxist all day long, but you're not getting the point of the Marxism. The point was not who the exploiter is, but the exploitation per se. You got to change the organization of the workplace so there isn't a group that makes all the decisions and gets the surplus vis-a-vis another one that produces it. If you do that, you will destroy the whole project. You will not only will you not achieve what you set out to get, but you'll so misunderstand it that the Germans again have a phrase, it's geht schief. It goes crooked. It doesn't go right. The project gets off the rails because it can't understand either what its objective should have been, and therefore it doesn't understand how and why it's missing its objective. It just knows that this is not what it had hoped.
And there's a lot of fascinating questions here. So one is, to what degree there's human nature? To what degree does communism, a lack of exploitation of the working class, naturally emerge? If you leave two people together in a room and come back a year later, if you leave 5 people together in a room, if you leave 100 people and 1,000 people, it seems that humans form hierarchies naturally. So the clever, the charismatic, the muscular, the powerful, however you define that, start becoming a leader and start to do maybe exploitation in a non-negative sense, a more generic sense, starts to become an employer, not in a capitalist sense, but just as a human. Here, you go do this, in exchange I will give you this. Just becomes the leadership role, right? So the question is, yes, okay, it would be nice, the idea of communism. not
It's nice
steal
in
from the
theory,
word.
but
I
it
see.
doesn't work in practice because of human nature.
That's thank you. So what can we say about leveraging human nature to achieve some of these ends?
There's so many ways of responding in no particular order. Here's some. The history of the human race, as best I can tell, is a history in which a succession of social forms of society arise, and as they do, they rule out some kinds of human behavior on the grounds that they are socially disruptive. The argument isn't really then, is there a need or an instinct? Is there some human nature that makes people want to do this? Well, whatever that is, this has to be repressed, or else we don't have a society. And Freud helps us to understand that repression is going on all the time, and it has consequences. It's not a finished project. It's gone. It doesn't work like that. So, for example, when you get a bunch of people together at some point, they may develop animosities towards one another that lead them to want the other person or persons to disappear, to be dead, to be gone. But we don't do that. We just don't. Every economic system that has ever existed has included people who defend it on the ground that it is the only system consistent with human nature, and that every effort to go beyond it has to fail because it contradicts human nature. I can show you endless of every tribal society I've ever studied, every anthropological community that has ever been studied, slavery wherever it existed. I can show you endless documents in which the defenders of the system, not all of course, but many defenders use that argument to naturalize a system is a way to hold on to it, to prevent it from going, to counter the argument that every system is born, every system evolves, and then every system dies. And therefore capitalism was we all know what the next stage of capitalism is.
Looking at if what you're saying,
the burden is on the people who think it isn't.
Okay, so it doesn't mean they're wrong, but what you're saying is if we look at history, you're the argument, this is going on because we keep using that for basically everything, including toxic relationships, toxic systems, destructive systems. That said, let me just ask a million different questions. So one, what about the argument that the employer, the capitalist takes on risk? So versus the employee who's just there doing the labor. The capitalist is actually putting up a lot of risk. What's not sort of aggregating this organization and taking this giant effort, hiring a lot of people? Aren't they taking on risk that this is going to be a giant failure?
So first of all, there's risk. Almost in everything you undertake, any project that begins now and ends in the future takes a risk. That between now and that future, something's going to happen that makes it not work out. I mean, I got into a cab before I came here today in order to do this with you. I took a risk. The cab could have been an accident. The lightning could have hit us. A bear could have eaten my left foot. Who the hell knows?
Should I reward you for the risk you took?
No, hold it a second. Let's do this step by step. So everybody's taking a risk. I always found it wonderful. You talk about risk, and then you imagine it's only some of us who take a risk. Let's go with the worker, with the capitalist. That worker, he moved his family from Michigan to Pennsylvania to take that job. He made a decision to have children. They are teenagers. They're now in school at a time when their friendships are crucial to their development. You're going to yank them out of the school because his job is gone. He took an enormous risk to do that job every day. to forestall all the other things he could have done, he was taking a risk that this job would be here tomorrow, next month, next year. He bought a house, which Americans only do with mortgages, which means he's now stuck. He has to make a monthly payment. If you make a mistake, you capitalist. He's the one who's gonna. You're a capitalist. You got money. Otherwise, you would be in that. You got a cushion. If you investigate, you'll see that. Every business I've ever been in, I've been involved in a lot of them.
So you think it's possible to measure risk, or is your basic argument is there's risk involved in a lot of both the working class and the capitalists, and it's very different.
The worker would never say, because she's busy. I want this payment, a wage, for the work I do. And I want this payment for the risk I take.
Well, there's some level of communication like that. You have acknowledgement of dangerous jobs, but that's probably built into the salary, all those kinds of things. You understand, but you're not incorporating the full spectrum of risk. Like
this country is now being literally transformed from below by an army of workers who work at Amazon, fast food joints. You know what their complaint is? It's killing us. We get paid shit, and it's killing us. There is no relationship, except in the minds of the defenders of capitalism, between the ugliness, the difficulty, the danger of labor on the one hand and the wage. Let me give you just a couple of examples, because this is my job, this is my life, right? The median income of a child here in the United States, right now, as we speak, is $11.52 an hour. Median, so 50% make less, 50% make more. The median income for a car park attendant is several dollars per hour higher than that. What does the car park attendant do? He stares at your car for many hours to make sure that nobody comes and grabs it. Maybe he parks it and he moves it around to get it in and out. By any measure that I know that makes any rational sense, being in charge of toddlers, 2, 3, 4-year-olds who are at the key moment of mental formation the first 5 years, to give a lower salary than you give the guy who watches your car. Come on, I know how to explain it. Gender explained all kinds of issues that the car park people and the child care people are female. And that in our culture is a very big marker of what you want. The one who said only the economics professor, nobody, says this stuff, because in economics, I don't know if you're familiar with our profession, we have something which we call marginal product. This is a thing. I was a mathematician before I became an economist. I love mathematics. I specialize in mathematics, so I know mathematics pretty well. What economists do is silly, is childish, but they think it's mathematics. It is. But think for a minute what it means to suggest that you can identify the marginal product of a factor of production, like a worker. In the textbook, when it's taught, I've taught this stuff. I hold my nose, I teach, then I explain to students what I just taught you is horse shit, but I teach.
What is the marginal product?
The notion is, if you take away one word right now from the pile, what will be the diminution of the output? That's the marginal product of that worker.
Measure
the amount of the output that diminishes
output of the raw product, of the product.
Usually in real terms, physical, not the value. You could do a value, but it's really more the physical.
I mean, there is a transformation thing I'd love to talk to you about value. It's so interesting.
Yes,
what is value?
I'd be glad to talk to you about value and price and all of that. But I just want to get to the Hegel, who's a teacher, has a famous line. You can't step in this twice. And the argument is you and the river have changed between the first and the second time. So it's a different river. You can choose not to pay attention to that. Just you can't claim you're not doing that. You can't claim that you can actually do that because you can't. There is no way to do that.
The meaning that you can't just remove a worker and have a clean mathematical calculation of the effect that it has on the output.
Because too many other things are going on. Too many things are changing. And you cannot assume, much as you want to, that the outcome on the output side is uniquely determined by the change you made on the input side. Can't do that.
Even in the average, it's not going to work out.
You can take mathematics is full of abstraction. You can abstract. You can say, as we do in economics, ceteris paribus. Everything else held constant. But you have to know what you just did. You held everything. You know why you do that? Because you can't do that in the real world. That's not possible. You better account for that. Otherwise, you're mistaking the abstraction from the messy reality you abstracted from to get the abstraction.
As a quick tangent, if we somehow went through a thought experiment or an actual experiment, removing every single economist, would we be better off or worse off?
Much better. Economics, and I'm one. You know, I'm talking about myself. See, economics.
We're going to ship all the economists to Mars. See how it works out.
But the serious part of this is that economics. You know, it's really about capitalism. Economics as a discipline is born with capital. There was no such thing. When I teach courses at the university, for example, called History of Economic Thought. Right? And I begin the students with Aristotle and Plato. And I say, you know, they talked about really interesting things, but they never called it economics. There was no, it made no sense to people to abstract something as central to daily life as economics broadly defined. It made no sense. That's a creation much later. That's capitalism that did that, created it. So when I give them Plato and Aristotle, I have to give them particular passages. By the way, because you're an audience who like it. Plato and Aristotle talked about markets because they lived at a time in ancient Greece when market relations were beginning to intrude upon these societies. So they were both interested in this phenomenon, that we're not just producing goods and then distributing them among us. We're doing it in a quid pro quo. I'll give you 3 oranges, you give me 2 shirts, a market exchange. And both Aristotle and Plato hated markets, denounced them, and for the same reason. They destroy social cohesion. They destroy community. They make some people rich and other people poor, and they set us against each other. And here's what they agreed on. Here's what they disagreed on. One of them said, okay, there can be no markets. That was Plato. Aristotle comes back and says, no. Too late for that. The disruption caused in society by getting rid of this institution that has crawled in amongst us would be too devastating. So we can't do that. But what we can do is control it, regulate it. Get from the market what it does reasonably well and prevent it from doing the destructive things it does so badly.
So the fundamentally the destructive thing of a market is it's the engine of capitalism, so it creates exploitation of the worker.
It facilitates it, and it is an institution that Plato and Aristotle feel is a terrible danger to community. Which, by the way, is a way of thinking about it that exists right now all over the world. Look, the medieval Catholic Church had a doctrine, the prohibition of usury. You know, and this was that God said, if there's a person who needs to borrow from you, then that's a person in need. And the good Christian thing to do is to help him. To demand an interest payment rather than to help your fellow man is God hates you for that. That's a sin. Jesus is crying all the way to wherever it is he goes.
But would Jesus be crying when you try to scale that system? So that has to do with intimate human interaction. The idea of Marcus is you're able to create a system that involves thousands of millions of humans, and there's some level of safe, self-regulating fairness.
There might be, but it's hard to imagine that charging interest would be the way to do that.
I wonder what. So I guess
Suppose you were interested in having. Suppose you took as your problem. We have a set of funds that can be loaned out. People don't want to consume it. They're ready to lend it. Okay. To whom should they lend it? Well, we could say in our society, we're going to run this the way professors in institutions like MIT work this. They write up a project. They send the project into some government office where it is looked at against other projects. And this office in the government decides we're going to fund this one and that one because they're more needed in our society. We're in greater need of solving this problem than that problem. And so we're going to lend money to people working on this problem more readily or more money than we lend over here because we're going to. But instead, what we do is who can pay the highest interest rate. Whoa, what are you doing? Why? What ethics would justify you do it? It's like a market in general. Something is in shortage. All markets are about how to handle shortage. That's one basic way to understand it. And so if the demand is greater than the supply, all the word shortage means, has no other meaning. If the demand is greater than the supply, okay, now you got a problem. You can't put the money. At this point, most human beings confronted with this explanation of a market would turn against it because it contradicts their Christian, Judaic, Islamic, all of them. Would say, what? You know what that means? It means that a rich person can get the scarce milk and give it to their cat, while the poor person has no milk for their 5 children. There it is. You want a market? Why?
The fundamental thing that seems unfair there is the resulting inequality. Now,
or death.
Well, that's the ultimate inequality.
Yes, it is.
What about? And we're going to jump around from the philosophical, from the economics to the sort of debate type of thing. What about sort of the lifting tides raise all boats? Meaning, if we look at the 20th century, a lot of people, maybe you disagree with this, but they attribute a lot of the innovation and the average improvement in the quality of life to capitalism, to inventions and innovation, to engineering and science developments that resulted from competition and all those kinds of forces. So not looking at the individual unfairness of exploitation as it's specifically defined, but just observing historically. Looking at the 20th century, we came up with a lot of cool stuff that seemed to have made life easier and better on average. What do you say to that?
I have several responses to that, but I do disagree pretty fundamentally with what's going on there. But let me give you the arguments so that you can hear them and you can evaluate them, as can anybody who's listening or watching. Marx was a student of Hegel, and one of Hegel's central arguments was that everything that exists, quote, in the contradiction. In simple English, there's a good and bad side, if you like, to everything. And you won't understand it unless you accept that proposition and start looking for the good things that are the other side of the bad ones, and the bad things that are the other side of the good ones, etc. So yes, exactly. And Marx, very attentive to that, explicitly agrees with this on many occasions, and applies it, of course, to the central object of his research, capitalism. So this is not a simple-minded fellow who's telling you all the bad things about capitalism as if there were nothing that this system achieved or accomplished. And one of the things he celebrates a lot is the technological dynamism of the system, which Marx takes to be profound because he lived at a time when major breakthroughs in textile technology and mining, chemistry, and so on were achieved. But as to the notion that capitalism is therefore responsible for the improvement in the quality and the standard of living of the mass of people, Marx now comes back and says, oh, wait a minute here. Number one, capitalism as a system has been mostly represented by capitalists, which makes a certain sense. And those capitalists, with very few exceptions, some very few, have fought against every effort to improve the lives of the mass of people. The goal of a capitalist is to minimize labor costs. What that means is replace a worker with a machine, move the production from expensive U.S. to cheap China, bring in desperate immigrants from other parts of the world because they will work for less money than the folks that you have here at home. Every measure to help the standard of living of American workers had to be fought for decades over the opposition of capitalists from the beginning to right now. The reason we have a minimum wage, which was passed middle of the 1930s, when it was proposed, it was blocked by capitalists. They got together. They don't want. And today, just a factoid for you. The last time the minimum wage was raised in the United States, federal minimum wage, was in 2009, when it was set at the lofty sum of $7.25 an hour, which you cannot live on. Over the last 12 years or so, whatever it is now, 13 years, since then, we have had an increase in the price level in this country every year. And in the last year, 8.5%. During that time that the prices went up, the minimum wage was never raised. What? This is a time of stock market boom, of growing inequality. This is the nerve of the defender of capitalism, who wants now to get credit for the improvement in the standard of life of the workers that was fought by every generation. You know, it takes your breath away. It's an argument. Whoa! But I take my hat off if I had one, because that is one of the only ways to justify this system. Long ago, let me get the heart of it. Long ago, capitalism could have overcome hunger, could have overcome disease, could have, I mean, way beyond what we have now. But it didn't.
Yeah.
And that's the worst moral condemnation imaginable. How do you justify that when you could, you didn't? Look, let me get at it another way, because this may interest you anyway. The issue is not that capitalism isn't technologically dynamic. It is. And along the way, it has developed things that have helped people's lives get better. No question. But the notion that the mass enjoyment of a rising standard of living is somehow built into capitalism is factually nuts and is such an outrageous. And I can give you because you do math, you'll understand it. Think of it this way. Imagine a production process in which you have $100 that the capitalist has to lay out for tools, equipment, and raw materials, and $100 that he has to lay out for workers to hire the workers. And he puts them all together, and he has an output. And let's say the output is 100 units of something, whatever the price is, and that's his revenue. And when he takes his product, sells it, gets the revenue. Let's say the revenue is, it doesn't really matter, it's 120, to a better word. And he takes 220, sorry. And he takes 100 of it and replaces the tools, equipment, and raw materials he used up, another 100 to hire the workers for the next shift, and the other 20 is his profit. Now along comes a technological breakthrough. A machine, a new machine. And the new machine is so effective, you can get the same number of units of output with half the workers. So you don't need to spend 100 on workers. You only need to spend 50. You can do it with half the workers. And so the capitalist goes to the workers. By the way, this happens every day. And he says to half of them, you're fired. Don't come back on Monday morning. I don't need you. It's nothing personal. I got a machine. Why does he do that? Because the 50 he now no longer has to spend on labor. Don't need half of them. He keeps. Everything else is the same. Machine. Everything else is just to make the math easy. So he keeps as his own profit the 50 that before he paid for those workers. Right? But he sells it for 20, that 50 he don't have to give to the next generation. So that's what he does. The technology leads. He's happy. He's become more profitable. He's got an extra 50, which is why he buys the machine. The workers are screwed. Half of them just lost their job. Have to go home to their husband and wife, tell them I don't have a job anymore. I didn't do anything wrong. The guy was nice enough to say there was nothing wrong with me, but I doesn't need a problem. So I'm completely screwed here. I don't know what I'm going to do about the debts we have, the house on mortgage, my children's education, or whatever else he's got going for himself. Right now the point. There was of course an alternative path. The alternative path would have been to keep all the workers, pay them exactly the same as you did before, for half a day's work. You would have got the same output, same revenue, same profit as before. But the gain of the technology would have been a half a day of freedom every day of the lives of these workers. The majority of workers would have been really helped by this technology. But instead they were screwed so that one guy, the employer, could make a big bundle of more money. You want to support a system like this?
Well, to go back to Hegel,
Yes.
the good and the bad. So you just listed the bad, and you also first listed the good, the technological innovation of this kind of system. The question is the alternative. Whatever, as we try to think up to ideas of what the alternative might look like, what are the good and the bad of the alternative? So you just kind of, as a opposite, the by contrast, showed that, well, a nice alternative is to work less, get paid the same, you have more leisure time, opportunity to pursue other interests, creative interests, family, flourish as a human being, basically strengthen, embolden the basic humanity. But then, what cost does that have on the deadline fueled, competition fueled technological innovation that is the positive side? The question is, which is more important for humanity?
I agree with you. And I'd love there to be a democratic mechanism. So let's discuss it. Let's debate it. And then let's decide what mixture, because it's not either or. The math problem I gave you is either or. We could mix it. You could have a third less of a working day instead of a half less, and then the other part would be extra profit. Let's democratic discussion. What is the mix between the two? All of this is decided by one side of this debate. It's not only we know what they do. They always choose the one that maximizes their profit because that's what they were told to do in business school, where I've taught. So not only is it an undemocratic decision, but it's lopsided to lose. So we don't have the opportunity. But I would love to be good at let's take a look at what's make the best decision that we can. We'll all make it. Might be one of us making a dictatorial decision. No, one there not as a notion of government. Not as a notion of how the government works, but as a notion of what the practice is not made by some sitting council. With the workers in the world, which is why. By the way, I can tell you right now, so it doesn't work in the background, what the alternative is.
Let's go there.
Okay. It goes right back to what I said earlier. The workers themselves, the collection of employees together appropriate their own surplus and decide democratically what to do, which includes the decision of whether or not to buy a machine and whether or not to use the machine and the savings it might allow to be handled by more leisure for themselves or as a fund for new developments in technology or new products or whatever they want. And you know, this is an old started reading extensively in anthropology. And one of the reasons he did that toward the end of his life was because he kept discovering that in this society and that, including here in the United States, that there were examples of people who organized their production in precisely this way, as a collective, democratic community in which everybody had an equal voice. So we all together decide democratically what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the output we all help to produce. So let's do it in this country. Value nearly everybody subscribes to. Think about it this way. The stunning contradiction that there is a place in our society that has never been allowed to enter. The workplace. In the workplace, a tiny group of people, unaccountable to the rest of us. The employer, whether that's an individual, a family, a partnership, or a corporate board of directors, tiny group of people controls economically a vast mass of employees. Those employees don't elect those people, have nothing. There is no accountability. It is the most undemocratic arrangement imaginable. And this society insists on calling itself democratic when it has organized the minor matter of producing everything in a way that isn't being directed. It's autocratic.
So to push back on a few things. So one is the idea of this society calling itself democratic is that the government is elected democratically and the government is able to pressure the workplace to minimum wage. That's one idea. The other is there is a national there's no monopolies of competition. So if you're a shitty boss, the employee capitalist system has the freedom to move to another company working for a better boss. So that creates pressure on the employers and the bosses. That's at least the idea that there's two boundaries of you not misbehaving. One is the law, so regulations passed by the government, democratic, and the second is because there's always alternatives, in theory, then that puts pressure on everyone to behave well because you can always leave. I mean, that's kinds of accountability. But what you're saying is that does not result in a significant enough accountability with the employer that avoids exploitation.
Whatever accountability you get in those mechanisms. And in response to that, here again, we have the Hegelian system. Competition destroys itself. It doesn't give you the whole point of competition is to beat the other guy. If I can produce the same product as the other guy, either a better quality or a lower price or both, then I win because the customers will come to me because my price is lower, my quality is better, and they'll leave the other guy out of business. Now let's follow. When he goes out of business, because I've won the competition, he fires his workers. I hire them because I'm now going to be able to serve a market he can't serve anymore. So I'm going to buy the equipment, and thereby many become few. Monopoly is the product of competition. It's not the antithesis, it's the product.
Well, let's see.
That's where it comes from.
Well, there's another element to the system where there's always a new guy that comes in.
There is.
Well, that's the entrepreneurial spirit of a free, of the United States, for example. The capitalist system is you can be broke and one day have a strong idea and build up a business that takes on Google and Facebook and Twitter and all the different car, Ford, GM, which is what the Tesla. That's the American dream. One of many ideals of the American dream is you can move from dirt poor to being the richest person in the world. And
It can happen.
it can happen. But
That's like you can win the lottery.
No, that's not quite. No, the lottery is complete luck. Here you can work your ass off to get
The odds are better in the lottery.
That's not true. There's a lot of new businesses.
How many Teslas do you know?
Tesla's a really bad example. Because the car company, the automotive sector is so difficult to, they operate at such a thin margin of profit. They're probably a good example of like capitalism just completely coming to a halt in terms of lack of innovation. Because, that's a very complicated industry because of the supply chain. There's so much.
Come on. They have their uniquenesses, you're quite right. But so does every other industry. The one thing that's common is that many become few. What you can also have is when you have a few, they jack up the price. They make an enormous profit. And in the irony of capitalism, amongst all of this, they begin to incentivize people to break into these because the few remaining are making a wide amount of profit because they are few and can make it work for them. So the reason every small capitalist is trying to build market share, that's a polite way of saying they want to become a monopolist, or to be more exact, an oligopolist, one of a handful of firms that dominate. That's what they're there for.
But yeah, to push back a little bit also, because that's could be. This is a question also. Do you think we're in danger of oversimplifying capitalism? It completely removes the basic decency of human beings. So if you give me a choice to press a button to get rid of the competition, but that's going to lead to a lot of suffering. There's a lot of people at the heads of companies that will press that button. That it's not in the calculation. It's not just money. It's human well-being too. Yes. So you're saying that the forces of capital take over the mind, and then they cease being human. Essentially,
No.
the basic.
I wouldn't.
Depending on your model of human, but they lose track of the better angels of their nature, and they just become cogs in the machine. But they're just happen to be the cog
I
in
would
the
tell it
top.
differently. The system is so set up. It's a little bit like natural selection. The guys who make, say the women too, it doesn't matter. The people who make it up through the layers of the bureaucracy and get to the top of these things have had to do things along the way that become selective. If they can't stand it, because they have that human quality, and they are people like I told them. They're the ones running the Airbnb in Vermont. They went there and they said, I'm not going to treat people like that. I'm going to make a lovely place in Vermont with my husband or my wife or whatever, and I'm going to be, enjoying the people that come by and be a decent. Of course. But the system is the firm, you don't do what has to be done to make the profit go up. You're toast there anyway. The rest of the people who vote for you are going to kick you out. You can tell them all they want what a lovely person you are. They're going to look at you and wonder what happened to you. How did you even get this far with the lovely person?
But it's not okay. It's not maybe my bias is the people I know are in not the companies or the tech sector where innovation is such a big part. So I think a lot of things we're talking about is there's not much innovation.
Innovation comes in the history of capitalism. Nuclear period. It comes and then there's a flurry as everything is reorganized around whatever the new technology is. And you have a period and the very rich people and they always about innovation. But again, it really is. This is a recurring kind of debate, a recurring kind of issue. For me, I don't mean that. Please. No, I don't. The problem with capitalism is, and maybe you'll like this, the problem with capitalism is not that it is the one thing that's consistent with human nature. That's what its defenders would like to have. But if anything, I would argue the opposite. That it is such a contradiction to parts of our nature, not of ours. There's always going to be people who don't go people who do quit. Or maybe a few of them actually make it to the top. By God knows what way. But most of them go. And you know why? Because their humanity is contradicted by what it is they're being asked to do. I mean, the corporate sector this year, just to give you an idea, CEOs are jacking up their wage back. They're already out of whack. The average CEO pay is now $300 workable days. But they're jacking it up even more. Why? Because that's what's happening in their universe. They're all doing it, and they have to. Each one of them justifies that I have to do that, otherwise I lose my guy. The next one, which of course is true, but is no comfort for the masses who aren't CEOs. This argument is very exciting. So they're doing it at a time when the American people can't cope. They've just gone through the COVID disaster. They've gone through the second worst economic crash of capitalism in our history. After 2 years of this 1-2 punch, they got an inflation, a third punch, and we are now predicting rising interest rates here or early next year. When this was done, it was country. We're already watching it. You're going to get that. You're ready to get
The quiet suffering amidst the class,
taking out
anger,
3 hours below the way people consume. And it happens every day in this country. Every day.
so that anger rises up in those little ways now and bigger
It's exponential. By the way, there's one more thing. On the right if you're interested, 49,000 people were killed in automobile accidents this last year. The number was just released yesterday. 49,000. Automobiles are the single largest pollutants in the country. They use up an enormous amount of energy. They use up enormous amount of resources. There is a way to make transportation much more rational. And we've known it for decades. It's called mass transportation. It's a really beautifully maintained, crystal clear, clean, frequent system of buses, trains, street trolleys, vans. It could easily be done in this society. In fact, I once did a project that I estimated cost $30 billion. That's less than we're sending to Ukraine. To do this, to reconfigure it.
The public transit system where?
Everywhere in this country. All the major metropolises. This country's overwhelmingly metropolitan area.
Well, if you really has to be more than 30 billion, but
Well, it was a few years ago.
sure, but you're saying it's
But I'm
not
using
a
a
lot
lot
that's insane.
Right, it's not crazy stuff.
It's a reasonable number.
Right.
Hey,
So-
listen, but there's
Let me just finish the point. Okay? So, I'm trying to be rational here. If we have a climate crisis, which everyone tells me we do, if it's got a lot to do with fossil fuels, which everybody tells me it has to do, and with the use of the fossil fuel, particularly for the automobile, then the solution to the problem would be mass transit. We're doing nothing to make that happen. Nothing.
well, there's you could argue that autonomous vehicles is a kind of public transit because it's going to be reusable vehicles. It will end, in theory, car ownership. You just have a more kind of distributed public transit system.
If it happens, but you know that's a side effect. His major goal, and the major goal of the other companies that are busy squeezing to get his share of the pie smaller, so they have some Ford, General Motors, Toyota, all of them making electric cars. So what they've done is they've replaced the individual car with fossil fuel with another individual car.
Yeah.
That's fucking nuts.
Well,
What
that's
are you
one,
doing?
it's one of the things they're doing, but automation is also another. But on the Elon side, there's also hilariously named Boring Company, which is working on tunnels, which is actually expanding the flexibility you might have to start playing with ideas of public transit. I think. Listen, I'm now partially living in Austin, Texas. That I don't know if they know what a public transit system is. Period.
Most
American
American
pickup trucks.
Yeah.
This is an interesting. So
The older, by the way, footnote, the older the city, the more likely it has public transportation.
So you're saying
Boston is the best example.
Yes.
Have you been?
Of course. Yeah, I have a place.
Boston with the street railway. Boston is your case study of how to do this because they've been doing it all along. New York's pretty good too.
There's a trade. New York, I would say, is better than Boston because their technology also helps you out to do the public transit better. It's almost like Boston's a little too old. But yes, I get your point. But there is the Ford F-150 pickup truck symbolizes something about America, and there is a practical nature to the fact that in order to do public transit, in order to do some of these things that you're talking about with the working class, there has to be a central planning component, or there has to be a centralized component. And America is very much based on the idea of, at least in recent times, I would say from the founding of individualism, of respecting individual freedom. Are you worried that in order to bring some of these ideas of Marxism to life, you would trample on individual freedoms?
For me, sure. For me, Marxism is a way to enhance the individual freedom of the mass of people who have had that freedom eroded under the capitalism. A motive behind Marx. It wasn't for Marx too. He loved the French Revolution. He loved the liberté, égalité, fraternité, great three, and then democracy, the American contribution. He believed in that. His critique of capitalism was it promised it and then never delivered it. And the reason you have to go beyond it is because it didn't deliver what he had promised. For me, it is the fulfillment of a agenda. But again, I'm a Hegelian Marxist. So individualism, for me, is not the way it's set up in this society. Some sort of antithesis to the government. I think an immense con has been pulled from the American people. And the con looks like this. You know what's bad and what's dangerous and threatens you? It's the government. The government's going to come in and tell you what to do. The government's going to run your life. The government is the problem. There really is no other way to explain the following in America. Large numbers of people lose their homes in a downturn like the so-called Great Recession of 2008. Who do they blame? The government. Large numbers of people go unemployed. And what is the media all about? The government. If I were a capitalist, I'd kick the workers by throwing them out of their home. I fire large numbers of people. I have no responsibility for what happens to them as a result of having no job and knowing. And they get angry at the senator. I'm laughing all the way to the bank. This is a genius stroke.
In theory, but if you look at government, as you said, accountability, capitalism, there's some pushback I give on the accountability. I think there is some accountability. Discuss Hegelian ways. There's more accountability. I would say that in theory, government is perfectly accountable. That's the whole point of a democratic system, is you vote people in. For practice, there's a giant growing bureaucracy that is accountable only on the party that seems to be the same. Media somehow integrated into making the same two parties that are just wearing different colored shirts seem like they're very opposed and they're arguing bitterly, calling each other spouses, names, and all those kinds of things. Okay, but that's government. So who exactly is worse? I agree. Government or companies?
Why are we asking that question? These are twins. Look what you were able to say about Republicans and Democrats just now, which I agree. I would say the same thing about corporations and the government. This is the same thing, literally.
Well, let's go to Churchill. Which one is worse? Let's go to Churchill. Like democracy is the worst form of government, except all the other ones, whatever. So this kind of same idea. Which one exactly is worse? Because to me, it seems like
between
government and industry and companies. It's because government is plagued by I would call it corruption because the corruption of bureaucratic paperwork, and then but they're not accountable. There doesn't seem to be a serious accountability.
Again, we're not living on the same planet. The greatest practitioners of central planning are corporations. Elon has an operation like General Motors, Ford, IBM, or any of the other megacorps. They have the plan. They buy up companies because they don't want to deal with the market. They don't want the insecurity, the uncertainty of having to buy their inputs or sell their outputs to somebody they don't control. They want the professor to teach the genius of a market. They hate the market. And when they grow to be big, they keep buying whoever they were dealing with before so they could better control them, which requires them then to plan the production and distribution of goods inside rather than buying them in the market. The model of the government is the private corporation. I have spent my life, I'll give you an example, in American university. Big one, famous, not just as a student, but as a professor. I teach staff. It's another one, right? They all model themselves after this. They model it. You can attack the bureaucracy of universities. Good reason. They're proudly modeling themselves on organizing their bureaucracy in a business-like manner. So you're looking at a difference which is there. The government and the private sector are partners, and both of them wouldn't have it any other way. The corporations want that from the government, and the government now knows that to please the corporations is the number one objective they have, because that's how they keep their jobs and keep their system going. And so, for all practical purposes, this is the same people.
But there's important differences that I don't know if they're fundamental or just consequence of history. If you have government, they're accountable in a different way than companies. Companies are accountable by, especially if you have a consumer, they're accountable by sort of consumer spending or not spending their money on whatever the heck the company is selling. The government is accountable by votes. And it seems like government, unlike companies, most companies' history, is always too big to fail. Meaning, you can always just print money. You can always save it. That creates a bureaucracy. You rarely pay costs of having bad decisions. Strict blame and very unclear who's responsible for bad decisions. So bad decisions, the government accumulates. So you become more and more inefficient and more in decision making in terms of, you said public transit. Should we build a public transit system in this city or not? That's a difficult decision. That's an interesting decision. I would say it's very often a very good decision. But whoever makes that decision should be accountable for good or bad decisions. And it seems like companies are more accountable. They pay. They feel the pain of having made a bad decision more because they can go bankrupt. There's much more day-to-day pressure to make good engineering decisions. Government doesn't seem to be under the same level of pressure. Do you disagree with that?
Everything in my history pushes me.
You may be living. I may be living on a different.
Who knows?
A planet or take different sort of drug.
I won't mention the name, but I personally had a lot to do with the very large country. And it involved two brothers and a family. One of the brothers was kind of the dynamite. And he was more responsible than anybody else. But he took care of his brothers. He had a nice feeling. The one brother who could not, without help tie his shoes, became a vice president. Got an enormous salary. Got a beautiful office in a skyscraper, not that many blocks from where I'm sitting right now. And that was the way that family and that company. And all of his relatives were somewhere in this company, doing a variety of whatever. Because, and my experience with this, and because I went to school, all my experiences with that big full of they made mistakes after mistake, which they were told. They were always able to blame somebody else, something else that scraped them through. And had they not been able to, they would have been replaced by another person who did the same thing for as long as they could. And they knew it. They wouldn't talk about it at family events. That's how I know.
Yeah, I mean,
I understand that you want the outside world. Look at this.
well, but again, with that kind of thing, at the risk of saying human nature again, I wonder what kind of system allows for that more versus less. This is the question of, I would call that, let's put that under the umbrella term of corruption. Which system allows for more corruption?
Remember the way I define system is more or less about a democratic workplace. Reconfiguring what happens when everybody has a vote, when you have to explain what the strategies are, what the alternatives are to a larger number of people than a board of directors or a major shareholders or whoever it is that most companies are responsible to. And now you've got a whole different universe. It's not a small group of people. It can't be hidden the way it's normally hidden. Most of it, on and on and on. This is, worker co-ops is what this is called in many parts of the world. So it's not that I'm advocating something that's never been seen before. Not at all. The Marxism I understand is to pick from historical precedents the things that we think will work better. And I think if all the people in an enterprise, just to drive the point home, democratically decided they would never give 2 or 3 individuals $100 million while everybody else can't send their kid to college. They're not going to do that.
So just to return to address this point about the particular implementation of Marxism, that was the early days in the Soviet Union. Why did Stalinism, for example, lead to so much bloodshed, do you think, and human suffering? Is there any elements within the ideas of Marxism that catalyzed the kind of government, the kind of system that led to that bloodshed?
I don't think so. I think there were many things that led to the bloodshed. All Stalin's regime did. I spent 10 years of my life writing a book about that to try to explain from a Marxist position the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. You might want to take a look at it. I'm going to say a few things now, but all of those things are spelled out in great detail, loads of empirical evidence in that work. So let me start with playing a little bit. The biggest impact that Marxism had on the Soviet Union was really not so much what the Soviet Union did, but what the rest of it did. You had a really interesting I don't know, parallel. The move. was that the old Russian regime collapsed. World War I just it fell apart. The Tsar, all of that. It couldn't survive. It had already been in trouble. There was a revolution in 1905. There was the loss of war to Japan. I mean, if you know, which I assume you do, you'll know that there was a lot leading up to the collapse in 1917. And in some ways, it was fortuitous that the political group, very small, that could seize the opportunity of that collapse, happened to be Marxists. Earlier on, with Kerensky, the first government tried, it wasn't people that pressed by Marxists. People skeptical, would not call Marxists by history. They tried, they couldn't. Lenin and the socialists were able to take them later. The rest of the world, though, was horrified. The rest of the world saw Marxism having taken this immense leap from being a political party, a movement, critical of capitalism, yes, but still not challenging the power. Now it had the power, and in a big country. And they freaked out. Americans, this country, the leadership of this country went to concern. We had a repression of the left, election which we had not seen. The 20s were a time Palmer raids in Boston, the Sacco-Vanzetti trial, really grim hostility. And you had the four countries, including the Soviet Union, to try to crush the revolution. U.S., Britain, France, and Japan all attacked. 10,000 American troops. So what you had right away was a notion in the West that this was unthinkable. There was a great professor at Princeton, Meyer, his first name, who wrote his wonderful book about all American policies since 1917. It's been a success. Even now, this fight with Ukraine is half about Russia, as if Russia still was the Soviet, as if people hadn't figured out. That was a big change back in 1989 and 90. You know, Yeltsin and Putin are not what you had before, or at least they're not Lenin. They may not be so different from some of the other. But so you had one factor was the utter isolation, the utter condemnation, low. I mean, I assume you know most of us hunted down the streets of Berlin. She's critical, by the way, but she was hunted down and hacked and killed.
You are attributing some of the bloodshed to the fact that basically the rest of the world is
turning against
it.
I mean, not in order of importance. It's a very important part of the psychology of being. It's what you would call paranoid if there weren't quite as much evidence that there was a lot of radar at that time. Nobody had ever done it. Look, you could see the effects of it by Stalin inventing the idea, which had no support at first, that you could have socialism in one country. That was supposed to be ridiculous. That socialism was international. Marx was against capitalism. Everything was, workers of the world unite, not workers of Russia. He had to go through a procedure of kind of coming to terms with the fact that the revolution he had in Russia, which was tried in Berlin, was tried in Munich, was tried in Budapest, was tried in Seattle here, they all failed. They all failed. And he's left. Sir, the French would say. Tout seul, right? You know, all alone. That's one. The second thing is economic isolation. Russia's a poor country, and it needed what it got before the war, heavy investment from the French and the Germans. But now this was all done. And you can see the display with the sanctions. The world is different and the sanctions don't work. The history, but that culture was, today it's completely different. Russia's a different place today, but Russia has China, and that changes everything. And they don't get that here yet, but they will.
Yeah, there's a very complicated dynamic with China, even with India.
Yep.
But
Or Turkey.
sorry to say, human nature may change at a slower pace.
Yes. That has occurred to me as well. I get that.
So can you steel man the case, or consider the case, that there's something about the implementation of Marxism, maybe because of the idealistic nature of focusing on the working class as workers unite, that naturally leads to formation of a dictatorial force, a dictator, that says, let us temporarily give power to this person to manage some of the details of how to run democracy, giving voice to the executive. And then that naturally will lead to a dictator, and that's power. Absolute power, as the old adage goes, corrupts absolutely. Is it possible that whenever you focus on Marxist ideals, you're going to end up with a dictator, and often, when you give too much power to anyone human, a small number of people, you will get a huge amount of trouble.
You put things together there. That's why if you give, but this one, if you remember, I told you it's one of the little ones,
And that is French.
Yeah, but it was a word in it's a city on the border of France. If you come from Alsace in German.
So they're German-speaking French city.
It's bilingual because it's been back and forth so many times in medieval days already that it literally go from one store to another. The proprietor here is French, and the proprietor is German, but they all speak both languages. You don't speak either of them?
I speak Russian.
Russian, but not German.
Ukrainian, no German. It took French for 4 years in high school, but I forgot all of it. I remember the romance and spirit of the language, but not the details. I'm sure I can remember.
If you allocate power unequally, undemocratically, and you do it for a very long period of time, and you do it on many levels of ideology, it is not surprising that it sticks and it stays. And you can make a political revolution or even an economic revolution, and you will discover it has a life of its own, and it's going to take a long time before people don't. If you have a religious tradition, Christianity, that prides itself on its monotheism, and that it doesn't want to have anything to do with the old Greek mythologies when there was Zeus and Diana and all the others, and they were very human-like, but instead we have one who is the absolute beginning and end. What are you doing? You're teaching people an authority line that comes from the individual. If you have a sequence of kings, if in your feudal manner the lord sits called the landlord, he has unspeakable power over everything that goes on, and you do this for thousands of years, you can make a Russian Revolution in 1917. But if you imagine you've gotten away from all that people assume without ever thinking about it, you're going to have trouble. Stalin is figured here as the originator of his situation, he wasn't. He didn't never had that power. He may have thought that, but I don't. He's the product. Look, the Cuban people made Fidel, who really wasn't that kind of guy. You know, he was a baseball-playing lawyer. That's what he was. But they made him into ta-da.
So it's not.
It's
not the
you're the
system.
product of history. No. It was the systems, feudalism, the church. It was the structures and institutions that cultivated in people a mentality that has its own rhythm and doesn't follow the calendar of a political revolution.
That's the fundamental question. Is there something about communism that creates a mentality that enables somebody like Stalin or Mao?
No, I think it's the social issues, problems the society has that make them then go to what they find familiar, to what seems to make sense. And he's the guy. Look, let me give you an example from American history. The Republican Party has traditionally, in this country, been the party of private enterprise and minimum government. In comes Trump, runs for office in 2016, is elected. Okay. What does he do? He commences the most massive tax increase and the most massive government intervention in the world of economics that we've had for decades. Nobody says anything. The Republicans cave, and the Democrats largely too. They cave. He can throw a tariff on anything. He gets up in front of the American people and he says the Chinese will pay the tariff. That's not what a tariff is. It's not how a tariff works. He would flunk a freshman course in economics, which everybody knows. Everybody who teaches these courses. No, it doesn't matter. He's still calling the shots. What is going on here is that a society has come to a point where it can't solve its problems. And it begins what? To tap into older forms. And all of the laissez-faire. And all of the individualism for living. And suddenly, the Republican Party is gung-ho. Now they're going to make abortion illegal. The government is telling you what you can do with your uterus. What? The government is being given more and more power. They're hoping what? Do they like the government? No. They're desperate. This is not a pro-government, and it wasn't in Russia either. They were in a desperate fix. And so, and he took advantage.
No fucking straight edge.
Would you say?
I'm sorry. I realize it's a life-changing epiphany for you, but no fucking straight edge. I'm serious.
National Socialism Party of German Workers, hence the Nazi Party, the Fascist Party in the 30s and the 40s. At the head of whom was Hitler, which I just recently learned he was employee number 7 of the party, or whatever, the 7th person to have joined the party, and have created one of the most consequential and powerful political parties in the history of the 20th century. What degree did Marxism ideas have to play? It is the National Socialist Party of German workers. Workers.
Not sure. This is the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, German
Worker Party.
National Socialist German Worker Party.
So
well, here's the history.
did he care about the workers, or did he just use the workers as a populist message?
The only thing that Marxism did for Mr. Hitler was provide him with his stepping stones to power, but it had nothing, no other. He didn't know anything about it, didn't care anything about it, nor did the people around him. Here's the story of what happened there, which I know largely through my own family, plus my own history that I did. The most successful socialist party in Europe was the German Party. It started around 1870. Marx was still alive. Some of his own family were leaders, Ferdinand Lassalle, others, his daughters. By the end of the century, it was the second most important party in Germany. Nobody understood it. It was almost as big a shock to the Europeans, as was the Russian Revolution in 1917. Here was a political party that was now in every German city, in every German town, powerful and enjoying its rise up. That's my family's involved in this. I mean, I really do know the story. It meant that starting around 1967, 8, if you wanted to have any kind of presence in the German working class, you had to use the word socialist. You had to. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay attention. The other parties called themselves Catholic. Germany is divided. The upper two, the northern two-thirds is Protestant. The southern third is Catholic. Munich, Bavaria is Catholic, and every other part of Germany basically is Protestant. You could be in the Catholic Party, or you could be in various conservative, Prussian, and other. If you wanted to have a presence in the working class, which was growing every other Germany, very powerful capitalist country, expanding like crazy at this time. You know, Germany was the major competitor to Britain for the empire. The United States was coming up too, but it was Germany and the U.S. taking over from Britain's empire. So the German working class was it. So anybody who wanted to approach the working class in whatever way had to come to terms and be friendly to socialism. Other parties did this too, just like that. They put the word socialist in their party, but they wanted to make it clear that they weren't anything to do with the Soviet Union or anything to do with Marxism. So they put the word national. Nazi is the first four letters of national. National in German. N-A-Z-I is how you spell national in the German.
National socialism, but definitely not communist.
That's right. They killed communists. They fought communists in the street. They had pitched battles. They literally threatened each other's existence and their life. And the first people that he arrested and put in jail were not Jews and gypsies and all the other people he eventually killed. It was communists. They were the number one socialists right behind them. Why? Because up until he takes power, January of 1933, that's when Hitler takes power. The last election, two of them, in 1932, the socialists and communists to vote together, 50% of the vote in Germany. So he appealed to the German manufacturers, the German capitalists, and he said, the communists and socialists are going to win. You're just the capitalist. You have too few people. You need a mass base, and I'm the only one that can do that. And they
populist message that he used.
That's right. But it was explicitly done as a deal. The ruling group said to Hindenburg, the old Prussian man who was in charge of the German government at the time, you have to invite Hitler to form a new government. Otherwise, he would never have done it. He had called Hitler nasty names before. The Prussian aristocracy looked down on Hitler as a little funny man with a mustache who was Austrian, in German. For them, that mattered. So he comes in as the enemy, the smasher of socialism and communism, which he immediately does. Only people who don't know or care about the history pick up on the word. You know, it's like there are people here in the United States who like to say, we are not a democracy, we are a republic. Which is like saying, I'm not a banana, I'm a fruit. You have to explain to these people, a banana is so you have to explain to people, yes, we're a republic, but we have a commitment to democracy as the way to govern the republic, because to say you're a republic doesn't imply what kind of government. You have to go through that with people so they kind of get it.
And certain words have power beyond their actual meaning.
That's
used in communication, whether it's negative, like racist, or positive, like freedom of speech,
or democrat, with a D.
Yeah, and you use that to mean something,
Who knows?
or negative. Stop Donnie, stop being a socialist, or some whatever that means. That's not even used as any kind of philosophical, economic sense. So let's fast forward to today.
Right.
You mentioned Bernie Sanders.
Right.
There's another popular figure that represents some ideas of maybe let's call it democratic socialism. Maybe let's try to start sneak up on a definition of what that could possibly mean. But AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's from these parts.
Yes.
So maybe you can comment on Bernie Sanders or AOC. Are they open to some ideas in Marxism? Are they representing those ideas well in both the economic and political sense?
Okay.
Where do I
begin? The socialist movement predates Marx, was always larger than Marx, and has gone on to develop separately after Marx's death. So
can we pause on that actually? Is there a nice way to delineate, draw a line between Marxism and socialism, or if Marxism is kind of a part of socialism?
that's better.
Can you speak to like maybe try to define once again what Marxism is and what socialism is?
Right. Marxism is a systematic analysis heavily focused on economics, and as I said earlier, devoted to mostly a critique of capitalism, and that's its strength, how it does that, how it poses the question, how it analyzes the way capitalism works. That is really the forte of the Marxist tradition. Socialism is a bigger, broader tent within which Marxism figures there, so that people who aren't Marxists are nonetheless aware of Marxism, like it more or less, study it more or less. But it's a broader notion that I like to use this sentence to describe. It's a broad idea that we can do better than capitalism. Really, there are all kinds of things about capitalism that are not what we as modern citizens of the world think about it. We are in a tradition that goes back to all the people who thought that they could better slavery, and all the people who thought that better feudalism. We've made progress. Feudalism was the progress of slavery. Capitalism was the progress of both of them. And progress has us stopped. And we are the people who, in a variety of ways, want the progress to go further, and are not held back by believing that capitalism is somehow the best beyond which we cannot go or even think. We find that to be, in the worst sense of the word, a reactionary way of thinking. And we're that large community. Many of us are not interested in economics all that much. We don't think that's the focal area. We are socialists, for example, because we want to do something to deal with climate change. We think the world is about to kill itself physically, and we want to take steps for other people to stop that, fix that. So that's for me a kind of difference. It's a little difficult to say because there's no other figure like Marx that has an equal impact, an equal place within the broad socialist tradition. And the only tradition that comes close might be the anarchist tradition, but that's very specialized, and that's a whole other kind of conversation. And whatever you say, the influence of the great anarchist thinkers, Kropotkin, Bakunin, Sorel, and others, still doesn't amount to the impact that Marx and Marxism has had so far. That could change, but up to this point, That's the, I think that's a way of understanding the relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting that some of the ideas within anarchism, of course, it's a varied disciplines.
Right.
There's such, maybe by definition, such variety in their thinkers, but they kind of stand for a dismantling of a power center, and that, if not equates, tends to rhyme with some of the ideas of socialism.
Absolutely.
So where you have the,
There's a whole train of thought in socialist ideas that he wants. That uses the phrase, quote, the withering away of the state. That's a quotation from Lenin. People should understand that's a quotation from Lenin. And it was made by Lenin positive. In other words, Lenin was saying, that's a good thing, that's something we stand, we want to create a condition under which there is, because you remember the communists, what they would call that first Russia, before the revolution, they were just socialists. They were hunted down and persecuted by the government left and right. They had no love for the government. Was their every enemy. And being critical of government didn't just mean this particular government, but of the whole. Being a Marxist, you always ask the question of the social constitution of whatever it is you're struggling against. So there was this interest. Why is the state so important? Especially